Hey everyone, how are you all doing today? When we think about the Middle Ages, we often imagine castles, knights, and battles. But much of everyday life pulsed not inside stone fortresses, but within humbler walls, those of the medieval inn. To step inside one of these establishments was to enter a crossroads of the world, a place where merchants, pilgrims, thieves, nobles, and peasants all brushed shoulders beneath the same smoky rafters. For the innkeeper, the day began before the first light of dawn. The fire had to be stirred back to life, its embers coaxed into flame so warmth and the smell of wood smoke would greet the earliest travelers. Benches and trestle tables, sticky with last night's ale, needed wiping down before the morning meal. In the stables, the clatter of hooves signaled horses demanding feed, for in many ways an inn's reputation rested as much on its care for animals as on its care for men. Guests stirred slowly, some grumbling as they rose from straw mattresses, others already haggling over prices for wagons' wares or safe passage. Pilgrims rubbed sleep from their eyes, clutching tokens of saints as they prepared for the road. Merchants inventoried goods, wary of pickpockets who prowled even within inn walls. And always the air carried a mixture of scents: bread baking, manure steaming, ale brewing, and the sharp tang of sweat that made inns both welcoming and overwhelming. The inn was more than shelter. It was the beating heart of medieval travel, a microcosm of society where every class and intention collided. To wake inside one was to awaken not only to a new day, but to the unpredictability of a world in constant motion. As the sun climbed higher, the inn shook fully to life. Morning at a medieval inn was never quiet. It was a blend of clatter, chatter, and the steady rhythm of people preparing for the road. The smell of baking bread and bubbling porridge filled the common room, mixing with the tang of smoke that seeped from the hearth. Breakfast was not grand, but it was essential. Travelers gathered at rough-hewn tables for bowls of thick pottage, hunks of dark bread, and mugs of small ale or watered wine. Pilgrims whispered prayers before eating. Merchants argued prices over mouthfuls of food, and soldiers in service to local lords sharpened blades or checked armor while tearing at crusts of bread. The innkeeper and his family moved tirelessly between tables, serving, collecting coins, and settling disputes with a firm glance or a quick word. For them, mornings were a delicate balance. Too much stinginess with portions, and guests would complain. Too much generosity, and profits vanished. Every ladle of stew and every refill of ale was measured not just in food, but in reputation. Outside, the yard bustled with equal energy. Stable boys led horses out for watering, their neighs and snorts rising over the morning din. Merchants loaded wagons while beggars lingered near the gates, hoping for scraps or coin. It was here, in this mixture of movement and noise, that the inn showed its true nature, not as a place of comfort, but as a hub of survival. For those on the road, the inn's morning was both a blessing and a reminder. It provided food, shelter, and the illusion of safety, but it also reminded travelers that the world beyond its walls was unpredictable. Every departure carried both promise and risk, and every arrival brought new stories, new dangers, and new opportunities. By midday, the inn reached its loudest and most colorful rhythm. What had begun as sleepy stirrings in the dawn now swelled into a chorus of voices, laughter, clattering cups, and heated arguments echoing under the timbered roof. If the morning belonged to the innkeeper's order and routine, the midday hours belonged to the chaos of human nature. The common room filled quickly. Merchants laid out samples of cloth, spices, or trinkets, hoping to strike deals with passing nobles or wealthy travelers. Negotiations flared like small fires, whispers over secret contracts, disputes shouted across the tables, and the occasional fist slammed down to emphasize a bargain struck. Pilgrims huddled together, exchanging stories of relics and miracles, while thieves and opportunists lingered in the shadows, ears sharp for loose talk of coin. Minstrels and storytellers often appeared at this hour, trading songs or tales for food and drink. Their voices rose above the din, weaving legends of kings, saints, and distant wars, captivating those who paused long enough to listen. Yet not all stories were innocent. Rumors spread here like spilled wine, staining reputations, sparking rivalries, or even feeding political intrigue. An inn at midday was not just a resting place, it was a stage where human ambition revealed itself in plain sight. Outside the yard mirrored the same energy. Messengers arrived bearing sealed letters, riders prepared for the next leg of their journey, and disputes over cargo space or broken wheels drew shouting crowds. The smell of roasting meat drifted from the kitchens, mixing with the pungent odor of horses and sweat. Flies buzzed around, undeterred by swatting hands or curses. For those seated at the trestle tables, this was more than a pause for food. It was an immersion into the living pulse of medieval society. Here, reputations could be built or ruined in a single conversation. Fortunes could change hands with the stroke of a quill, and alliances could be born in the sharing of ale. By midday, the inn was no longer just a shelter on the road. It had become a theater of commerce, ambition, and survival, where every word carried weight and every stranger was both a potential ally and a possible threat. As the sun dipped past its zenith, the atmosphere inside the inn shifted. The frantic hustle of morning trade gave way to a slower rhythm, yet one charged with its own kind of energy. This was the hour of rest for some, and the hour of risk for others. The common room filled once more, but now with a different tone. Merchants who had sealed their bargains leaned back with mugs of ale, their voices loud and triumphant, while those who had lost profits nursed quiet bitterness. Pilgrims rested weary feet, some offering small tokens or prayers in exchange for a meal, others listening eagerly to storytellers who spun fables to pass the time. Entertainment took center stage in these hours. Dice clattered across rough wooden tables, coins changing hands with every risky throw. Card games, though less common, sometimes unfolded in smoky corners, drawing both laughter and sharp accusations of cheating. Minstrels, if they lingered, filled the air with music, sometimes uplifting, sometimes mournful, reminding all present that travel was as much a burden as it was an adventure. But alongside leisure, tension simmered. Too much drink loosened tongues, and careless words could spark disputes. A jest meant in good humor might be taken as insult. A wager lost might end with fists rather than handshakes. The innkeeper and his staff walked a tightrope, intervening when quarrels threatened to turn violent, knowing that a single brawl could ruin the fragile peace that kept guests returning. Beyond the walls, the yard was equally alive. Children darted about chasing chickens, stable boys dozed in the shade, and travelers prepared for evening departures. The smell of spiced stew thickened in the air, promising warmth against the cool that would soon descend. Yet even outside, not all was calm. Debts were called in. Suspicious eyes tracked unfamiliar faces, and the occasional clash of steel reminded everyone that the road was never far away, even within the supposed safety of an inn. Afternoon at a medieval inn was a crossroads of mood, half festival, half powder keg. At any moment, laughter might erupt into song, or into violence. As twilight settled and the last glow of the sun faded, the medieval inn entered its most unpredictable and dangerous hours. By night, the inn transformed from a place of trade and rest into something rawer, half sanctuary, half den of temptation. Candles flickered along the walls, their wax dripping down iron holders, casting long shadows that danced across the beams. The hearth roared with fresh logs, its fire the heart of the common room, where travelers gathered shoulder to shoulder. The smell of roasted meat and spiced ale hung thick in the air, drawing both the weary and the reckless. For some, nightfall was a time of release. Jug after jug of ale was poured, laughter grew louder, and songs echoed through the rafters, some bawdy, some brave, all tinged with the desperate joy of those who lived with uncertainty. Minstrels sang until their fingers blistered, while dancers, whether locals or wandering entertainers, swayed to the rhythm of pipes and drums. Gambling tables grew crowded, the clatter of dice and the scrape of coins marking fortunes won and lost in the span of minutes. But as merriment swelled, so too did the shadows of danger. Thieves prowled in the press of bodies, slipping rings from fingers or purses from belts. Drunken arguments erupted into violent scuffles, steel flashing when words failed. Whispers filled the darker corners, secret meetings between mercenaries and spies, illicit deals struck under cover of laughter, trysts arranged between travelers who would be gone by dawn. The inn at night was alive not just with festivity, but with secrets, both sweet and sinister. For the innkeeper, these hours were the most perilous. Too much indulgence could ruin reputations, too much violence could end in bloodshed, and yet too strict a hand might drive away business. Keeping the peace meant walking among revelers with a sharp eye and a ready word, calming tempers while pretending not to hear every hushed bargain or desperate confession. Outside, the yard grew still, save for the stamping of hooves and the occasional bark of a guard dog. The road was cloaked in darkness, and those who arrived after nightfall carried both weariness and suspicion. To step into an inn after sunset was to step into a world where joy and danger mingled so closely they were indistinguishable. By night, the medieval inn revealed its truest face, a place where hunger, greed, laughter, and fear all met beneath the same smoky rafters, where survival was not just about finding a bed, but about navigating the shadows. When midnight had passed and most guests had surrendered to sleep, the inn did not fall into total silence. Instead, it entered a liminal state, half dreaming, half awake, where only a handful of figures remained active, moving quietly beneath the dim glow of fading embers. In the corners of the common room, a stubborn group of gamblers still hunched over a rough-hewn table, their eyes bleary but sharp, coins clinking in the flicker of candlelight. The stakes were smaller now, less about fortune and more about pride, but each throw of the dice seemed heavier, more desperate, as though the night itself wagered against them. By the door, a guard dozed with one eye open, his hand resting lazily on the hilt of a dagger. Not all who traveled trusted the night, and some hired men-at-arms to watch their purses as carefully as their lives. Outside, the yard was cloaked in silence, save for the restless stamp of hooves and the occasional bark of a dog, warning of shadows beyond the gate. But not all who lingered were gamblers or guardians. In the darkest corners, whispers carried the weight of secrets. Two cloaked figures leaned close, exchanging hushed words over sealed parchment, perhaps a message, perhaps a bribe, perhaps something more dangerous. Elsewhere, a weary minstrel tuned his lute in silence, playing only for himself now. The songs no longer for coin, but for company, against the solitude of night. For the innkeeper, these hours were both a relief and a trial. Most guests slept, easing the burden, yet the ones who remained awake were often the most troublesome, too drunk, too proud, or too secretive to be trusted. He walked the floor slowly, pretending not to notice the clandestine dealings, keeping peace where he could, and praying that dawn would arrive without blood on the floorboards. In these late hours, the inn became something different once again. Not the roaring hub of trade nor the wild den of revelry, but a fragile twilight world sustained by firelight, suspicion, and the stubborn refusal of a few souls to surrender to sleep. At last, the hour grew so late that even the most stubborn gamblers, the most cautious guards, and the most secretive conspirators gave in to fatigue. One by one, candles guttered and died, until the common room lay in near darkness, lit only by the faint orange glow of embers sinking into ash. The inn seemed to fall into slumber with its guests. Floorboards creaked softly, as though the timbered walls themselves sighed after the weight of so much noise and life. From the loft above, the steady chorus of breathing, snores, murmurs, and the restless tossing of travelers rose and fell like waves upon a darkened shore. The straw mattresses rustled, fleas bit unnoticed, and dreams tangled with the sounds of the night. Outside, the world was hushed. The stable smelled of hay and horse sweat, the animals shifting only to snort once or paw at the dirt before resettling. A dog dozed beneath the gate, ears twitching at distant noises, an owl's cry, the rustle of leaves, or perhaps nothing at all. Beyond the wooden fence stretched the great unknown of the medieval road, silent and shadowed, waiting for the dawn. Inside, the innkeeper finally lay down his weary body, knowing sleep would be brief. His mind lingered on the coins counted, the brawls avoided, the secrets overheard. Tomorrow would bring the same cycle: arrival, bargaining, laughter, quarrels. But for this brief window, he allowed the building, his livelihood, and himself to share in the same fragile rest. In these hours, just before the world turned again toward morning, the inn became more than walls and rafters. It was a living thing at rest, holding within it the warmth, fears, and fleeting hopes of all who had passed through its doors that day. As the first pale light of dawn crept through the cracks in the shutters, the medieval inn stirred once more. The silence of the night gave way to faint movements, boots shuffling across wooden floors, a cough breaking the hush, the low murmur of voices not yet fully awake. What had been stillness only moments before now shifted into life again, as though the building itself exhaled after holding its breath through the long night. The innkeeper was the first to rise. His footsteps echoed softly as he rekindled the fire, coaxing sparks into flame until warmth and smoke returned to the heart of the room. Soon the smell of baking bread and simmering porridge drifted from the kitchen, announcing the day's beginning more surely than the rising sun. Travelers stretched stiff limbs, rubbing the sleep from their eyes. Pilgrims clutched their staffs and whispered prayers before the day's march. Merchants inventoried their goods once again, anxious to set out while the roads were still cool. Horses stamped impatiently in the yard, their breath misting in the morning air as stable boys hurried to feed and water them. The echoes of the previous night, laughter, quarrels, whispered bargains, seemed distant now, as if they belonged to another life entirely. Yet the marks remained. Overturned mugs left sticky on the tables, a stain of ale on the floorboards, a broken bench hastily propped against the wall. The inn carried its history with it into each new day, just as its guests carried their memories, regrets, and ambitions back onto the road. And so the cycle began again. The inn was not merely a resting place, it was a rhythm, a constant heartbeat in the uncertain flow of medieval travel. As long as the road stretched onward and weary feet sought shelter, its doors would open, its hearth would burn, and its walls would echo with the countless stories of those who passed through. When we look back on the medieval inn, it becomes clear that it was never just a building of timber, stone, and smoke. It was a living stage where the vast play of human life unfolded in miniature. Within its walls, kings and beggars, merchants and pilgrims, thieves and storytellers all crossed paths, sharing the same roof, the same fire, the same uncertain night. The inn embodied the paradox of the human condition, comfort and danger intertwined, generosity and greed colliding, laughter and violence separated only by the turn of a dice or the heat of a careless word. It was at once a shelter from the road and a mirror of the road itself, a reminder that even when we rest, the world around us does not cease to move. Perhaps that is why these places mattered so deeply. They gathered strangers and transformed them, however briefly, into a community. A handful of hours spent together in the flicker of firelight became a reflection of the broader world, fragile, fleeting, and yet profoundly meaningful. To spend a day and a night in a medieval inn was to witness the whole spectrum of human life compressed between dawn and dawn again. And in that cycle of rising, bargaining, quarreling, feasting, dreaming, and departing, we glimpse something timeless: the need for connection, the hunger for safety, the restless drive to keep moving, even when the road is uncertain. The medieval inn may now be a relic of history, its smoky rafters long gone. Yet the essence remains alive in us, in every place where strangers meet, share food and stories, and part ways with memories they carry forward. In that sense, the inn never truly closed its doors, it simply changed its form.